Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'll be talking about this co-design work that I've done together with my colleagues Jacqueline and Erlend. That was about this mHealth app for self-management of cystic fibrosis. I'll talk a bit more about cystic fibrosis later on, so don't worry. But basically here we'll try to focus on explaining a little bit how it was the process, present a few of the UI elements that we came up with the users, some of the most interesting ones, and some of the cross-cutting issues that I think is some of the most interesting things, especially for us comparing other cases and so on. There will be quite a lot of more things that I won't be able to cover in the presentation. I also recommend, if you're interested in going further on, to look at the paper. So the research context of this paper is a disease called cystic fibrosis. I'll be referring as CF for convenience. And cystic fibrosis is a disease that affects both the digestive system and the lungs, and it's quite a intensive disease. Basically, the people that have cystic fibrosis, they spend in general about 2 hours per day for their treatment, because they really have to do a lot of things as part of their therapy. They have to clear their airways using this kind of nebulizers or such. They have to actually take extra enzymes before every single meal, because their digestion doesn't work so well, so they need extra enzymes, and they also need to have a very rich diet, so they need to eat actually a lot of fat. As a consequence, they also have a quite frail system, and they are often subject to airway infections and so on, so they often have to take medicines for other diseases. And at last, these patients, they are often recommended to do a lot of physical activity, because physical activity naturally helps to clear up the lungs and help to build lung capacity. So as you can see, actually they have to do quite a lot on a daily basis as to cope with this disease. Therefore, it's a disease that's a quite interesting channel to study self-management, because there is quite a lot of things that are on hold of the patient. And this well, in our research, we are actually a part of a wider project called mHealth, which is a EU project, where in the EU project, basically, we are developing a whole ecosystem of applications, mobile applications for parents and patients, games for children, some sort of backend for doctors to interact with the data of the patients. And we'll be making a trial of this ecosystem for a whole year in 5 different countries. But in this talk and in the paper I wrote, we focus specifically on the app that's going to be used both by parents and youngsters and patients. For the other apps, you can actually contact the project, can ask me, and I can put in contact with other people. So the process for the co-design, started with interviews and looking at the literature, trying to understand the needs and requirements of those patients. Then we had co-design workshops. We went around also to validate our designs with the health professionals. And finally, we had a small evaluation. This was in terms of the design. Now the project is already moving on to prototype development, and soon we'll have the trials. Regarding the interviews and the literature, basically, I don't know if it's because it's a rare disease or such, but we just had found one single paper looking at what would be, let's say, app preferences for people with cystic fibrosis in terms of self-management, how actually they could benefit from mobile applications for helping the self-management. So there was just one paper that was actually surveying adults in a clinic in the US, and so we expanded from it. We did interviews in 7 different EU countries. We talked not only with let's say patients, actually talked with both young and older patients, but also with parents, health professionals, CF associations. So actually went a bit over to all the stakeholders, and as a result, we got 466 needs, where those needs are both, let's say, high-level requirements, but also details of each need. So later we managed actually to compress those needs to 9, let's say, more overarching or higher level requirements. Some of them that were also identified on the paper that did the study in the US. And our approach was to take those high level requirements and bring them to workshops with the patients. So we would present those requirements, actually features, functional requirements of features. We'd present those features, would actually go there and check with the patient which feature they were more interested in, and then ask them to see how they would actually use that feature on the daily life. We were putting already a limitation that they would use a mobile phone, and they would imagine then using this feature to support self-management on daily routine using the mobile phone. And we asked them to draw elements or made questions as to get information about how those elements would look like. And so from there we got a couple of sketches, and then we gathered all those sketches, gathered the needs that we had already got before from the interviews, and we draw mock-ups using Balsamiq. We got those mock-ups where basically we presented actually all those different features in ways that were transmitting also some of the non-functional requirements or the wishes that we captured, and we got them for patients to test in a think aloud fashion. So we were actually testing them with patients and trying to have them to transmit what are their expectations and what they felt by using that, what they wish, what was not there, and so on. So through those workshops, we managed to actually refine more the UI elements, and to some extent also get some of the appreciation, because we would always try to ask patients, okay, did you like this, or what did you like? It was a mix of think aloud process and also a bit of semi-structured interview in the middle and at the end of the process. And from that we had a validation with doctors, so we actually walked through the whole mock-up, all the features with doctors, actually not just the doctors, but nutritionists, nurses, so all the health professionals that were involved, so that they could validate and they could actually see if there was nothing, let's say, wrong, or nothing that actually could have some problem or threat to the patient or such. Doctors, they are very important in the process. They know a lot about it, and they are the other end that will support the self-management. And we had a small evaluation with a few open questions, asking a bit what people liked it, what they disliked it, and we had some a Likert 5-item scales for some UI elements that were more interested in getting a few more feedback. So that was the process that we've executed. So talking about the functional requirements that we got, so and this actually shows a bit how complex it can become to address the whole needs of self-management of this disease. So basically, it started, for example, from enzyme management, because as I mentioned, they need to take enzymes before every meal. So one way that the app could help is by calculating how much enzymes they have to take, because nowadays this is done by estimation, and that goes all right when they eat something that's familiar, but when it's something is not familiar, they can make mistakes, and making a mistake there, at least for the digestion, is not so critical, but they can get constipated or the opposite, so it's not so good. And this also goes hand in hand with nutrition management. That's quite important for them to be sure that they are getting enough nutrients to cover what they expend during the day, especially for children that are in a growth phase. That's very important. And patients themselves, they said that they were interested not only to see whether they are growing or eating enough to pass the day, but also about having a healthy alimentation and so on. Patients were actually quite interested in nutrition management. And in line with that, there was the aspect of receipts, that they wanted to get some hints about receipts that were proper for people with CF, so that had a lot of fat intake, because they they would often like get a bit of bored about eating the same things, and they were looking for additional inspiration. I thought that would be very nice to receive from the app. And some of them were very interested in having symptoms registration, both so they could actually follow it up and visualize how their health progress, but also so they could easily talk with the doctors to say, okay, actually, this is what I felt, and I don't need to remember it or such. Some of them were interested in reminders, especially when they have to take new medicines, or also consultations or some events that don't happen on a very routine fashion. And some were also more interested in learning about the diseases. There were groups of patients that were also interested in communicating with health professionals, to be able to get in touch with the health professionals easily through the app, and also to communicate with other patients. But those are two requirements that we actually didn't work further in the project. The first one about communicating with health professionals, because we noticed that when talking also with the doctors, that this would be a bit problematic in the sense that the doctors, at least in this project, they are not, they have a whole workflow that's based on the patient has a problem, it goes through the nurse and makes an appointment, and then they talk to the doctor. And in the daily routine of the doctors, they wouldn't have time to receive messages from the patient, start responding to this. So actually, to explore the communication of health professionals, we would have to look in a whole new project just to look at the workflow and rework this workflow. So that was out of the scope. And regarding this cross-communication with patients, that was a bit more in the line of a forum of patients. It would be too complex to do something and create a community, actually community in 5 different countries in so short time. So we thought the application was already complex enough without those two, and we didn't go ahead with those. In terms of non-functional requirements, basically people wanted the app to ideally actually help them save time. So if they would actually want the help to reduce the time they spend on the disease, but well, if it's bringing some additional value, they would be willing to spend some time in the app, but they want it to be as little as possible. They wanted also customization and control of the data, but this I'll talk a bit later in the presentation. One thing that they stressed that they wanted everything on the same app. They didn't want to have something fragmented using several different apps. Yeah. So I'll show a few of the UI elements that I think that were quite interesting. So here a few about regarding the food registration, because I mean to do the enzyme calculation, nutrition management, you have to register food. This is actually one of the very tricky problems, especially because in this case you need a decent level of detail of the nutrition information and so on to be able to have a meaningful, for example, nutrition follow-up and the calculation of the enzymes and so on. So I had to enable them to have this fast food registration. And with the patients, we managed to come up with a few concepts that you can already see in some apps that do food registration, like adding food items by by scanning a barcode, autocomplete search, or bookmarking your favorite meals or dishes or the recently eaten. But there were some that actually I hadn't seen in apps such as Lifesun or MyFitnessPal, and that were very interesting, such as setting meals as recurrent. I mean, patients, they eat the same breakfast in practice every day. A lot of them would eat the same lunch, or when it comes to dinner, they would vary, I don't know, between 20 recipes, not so much. Okay, there are some days that are different, but there was a lot that they could automate by allowing the app, for example, to be able to set recurrent meals, so they don't have to re-register things every day, and to quickly be able to create variations, you know, like sort of copy and paste and edit. So these was 2 different interesting concepts that came up. Besides also the varied quantity units. This is something that you already have, that you, in some apps that you register, let's say milk in terms of a glass or milliliters, but they also come up with this approach that, for example, you could visualize like a dish, really in a proper dish, and select the amount visually in the dish, and you have some equivalences such as the size of the dish. Afterwards, you get how many grams you have there. So you have different ways for you to think about actually what to quantify this and help it to make it as easy as possible. For receipts also, there was an interesting case. I mean, a few of the requirements of receipts they were a bit as expected, so they wanted description, then with number of portions, ingredients, and so on. They wanted categories like flavor, if it's sweet, sour, so etc. But also practicality was very important. Like, can I do this in until 5 minutes of cooking, or is like 10 to 20, or more than half an hour? They wanted social aspects, and here there was something that was quite interesting that when doctors saw that, they were a bit scared. They were, okay, what if we're giving actually this app to the patients, and what if recipes that are not really proper for CF are there, or recipes that are not good? Some of the doctors are nutritionists, so they were very worried about that. So in this case, at least, we managed to come up with a solution that was a midterm, that we said, okay, let's have a symbol that denotates recipes that are curated by the doctors and that are approved by the doctors to differentiate from other recipes. And this is a way to actually make both stakeholders happy, because then people could have their recipes that they change, but also there will be the recipes from the doctor, and it's clear which one are coming from who. For symptoms, basically there were a few patients that were quite happy with being able just to say, okay, I'll be able to tell where I have pain and so on, while others, they wanted actually to have a more like a human body there, and be able to actually select where is the pain, such as like this drawing, where I would be able to select where in the body is the pain. And then one thing that was very important for the doctors is that you set the context, because for the doctors, actually the context on is very much important to understand how actually, I mean, this pain is coming and what could it be associated to. So for example, for abdominal pain, it was important for doctors to know if it's before the meal or before going to sleep, to try to understand whether it actually is related to the digestion or not. But overall symptoms, besides this drawing, a lot of it could actually be done with check boxes plus selection boxes for context. And one thing that was interesting, we asked whether using the microphone or camera would be interesting, like to, I don't know, record the coughing, or they have sometimes secretions, and to take pictures of the secretions. And there some people were like, they were actually a bit worried, for example, if the patients, if I take a picture of the mucus, would that be my gallery of pictures? And actually at the end, in this case, it was also not a big deal, because the doctors themselves, they also said that this would be of little use. So we quickly discarded this option. But I don't know, perhaps for some diseases where graphics like a picture, a snapshot of a bruise or such makes sense, perhaps their pictures could help. But for this case, it was really not the case. And if one think about it, you have to think about this aspect of the user, and taking picture of something and keeping in the gallery, something to think about. There was also a part for notes, and that was quite interesting, because we initially thought that those notes would be just additional context for the symptoms, but a lot of patients interpreted this as personal notes that they wanted to make during the day. And then, obviously, if it's a personal note rather than a symptom, a context of a symptom, they will have different attitude towards sharing or not. So I want to talk about more UI elements, although we have some others that we findings that we have described in the paper, and jump to the cross-cutting issues. They're also quite interesting. So we had different users in different countries, and therefore different privacy preferences. Some people were like, I just want the practical things, so send all the data to the doctor automatically. Others, they wanted to choose all the data, decide when to send. Some actually wanted to be able to actually go through the data to really in details to decide. So finally, we come up with a solution that basically the people it would be really customized. People could just set to send automatic, or just choose a period and send to the doctor, or even be able to print send a report and print a PDF, so they could, for example, even just take the data that they want to send the doctor, and then bring that in the consultation. One thing we noticed there is also regarding the expectations of health professionals and patients, that they differed quite a lot. There was this aspect, for example, even of sending the data, that patients were wondering, okay, so if the data is going to be sent, will the doctor be able to act on it quickly? I was expecting the doctor then to be able to call me and so on. The doctors were saying, well, just like I mentioned before in the communication, that's not possible. So it was very important for in the app, and the process that the doctors will be giving the app to tell the patients, okay, this data will be, even if you choose to send automatically, this is just going to be used in the consultation. So if you actually have an issue, you feel like you need attention to the doctor, you should go through the regular channels and get in touch with the doctor. So there was, there is a need of actually getting this clear in the app. Another aspect that was a bit of a conflict between patients and health professionals regarding advices. Patients, they wanted actually the app, as you put symptoms, to be able to tell you, okay, you should take this medicine. You should, you probably have this, to really diagnose, and the doctors were completely against it. They said that it was really not possible to capture enough context to be able to properly diagnose something with the app, because there is just too many symptoms that are common across different diseases and so on, and too much context information that needs to be acquired, that they really needed a meeting for such. So just hurry up a bit. There were some cross-cutting issues about the parents and child usage, because the idea is that basically the children would start using it as soon as they are mature to manage their own health, and parents would use in parallel. I mean, they would start using beforehand and then in parallel. And we thought, okay, what if there is a conflict and so on? But when talking with parents, basically, we thought that actually the simple solution is just we leave parents and child to decide who selects something and when, who overrides the data. There is no need to have a fancy technical solution for that. We noticed actually that there were actually very many different patients with different priorities. Some, for example, that just had kids diagnosed with this disease. They would really need a lot of information, while others not. Some patients develop diabetes. So there was a strong indication about being able to customize the app, because some things wouldn't be so interesting for some patients, some would. As I mentioned before about the aspect of the recipients, there is this aspect that the doctors, they want to be to some extent in control of what is going to be there, since they are recommending the app, while patients, they want actually flexibility. They want to be able to exchange things. And there was a concern on doctors about having data quality there, the data design. And just, I am out of time, so just mention that, well, future work now is evaluation of the app in the trials. We'll be testing acceptance, usefulness, adherence, and impact on the treatment. I'm open for questions.
Do you have any questions?
Was there any concerns from the health professionals about litigation? So in the U.S., the first things the doctors say is, I don't want to be sued. It doesn't seem like this was one of the issues in Europe.
No, there was no, at least not explicitly about that. I mean, they have this concern about, as I point about sort of that things there in the app would be, like everything would be app, with like the receipts, they would be good and so on. There was this another aspect of goals, patients would be able to set goals, and they said, okay, we need to be involved there. We cannot then let them just set any goals. But at least they haven't explicitly shown this concern. Maybe because it's also still in a clinical, we would just have a clinical trial, so it's not let's say a commercial rollout, but so far not yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because in the U.S., I mean, even when we're just doing a prototype, well, that's the first thing they say is no. And even ethics boards will say, will Georgia Tech get sued? So it's very interesting that doesn't come up at all.
Just to tell you, we're very tight on time. So if Rosa will set up while Thomas answers some questions. I saw some hands up here. Yes.
Maybe related. Okay. Maybe related to the question that has been said. In our experience, there is a very different power balance between doctors and patients. So how do you think that affects the code design? Because you mentioned that there were some requirements from patients and some requirements from the doctors. And in our experience, you have always to follow what the doctor says, because if not, in one project we had, we showed them the final product and we ask them, what do you think? Oh, it's very interesting, yeah, very well done. Will you use it? No, I will not use it. And that's it, okay? And related to that, have you considered or have you already asked for the permission from the national body that allows for sanitary products? Because we have also a problem for doing a trial, not litigation, but they have to approve the product, even to do a clinical study.
Well, in this case, the doctors are also part of the project. In fact, the algorithm to calculate enzymes is actually done by the doctors. And so the doctors are taking care of the ethics approval and basically the whole approval for the clinical trial. So this is on track. Regarding the stakeholder powers, basically what they try to do is to dialogue, to discuss with the doctors. So when there was a conflict, we would bring to the doctors. We would present would hear their point of view, would present them one of the user, and would also try to argue that if you try to make things very complicated, people will not use it, and then you lose the sense of the clinical trial. But it's true that, for example, for some aspects like, for example, one that I didn't manage to touch about data quality. So the doctors will need data of high quality. So when it came to symptom reporting, they wanted to be sure that, our first design was that if people don't have any symptom, just don't register a symptom. We make it as little interaction as possible. And doctors were like, no, but what if the person has forgotten? We need to be sure that he has forgotten instead of have not registered. And that complicates a bit the user interaction, to have the person to manually say that they haven't done. So we try to, the way that we address it is actually to try to make it as easy as possible, for example, for that one, to have for a person to say that actually he just didn't really have any symptoms, that he didn't have any symptoms during that day or a couple of days, but we end up in implementing. While for others we managed to come up with something in the middle, like the receipts and so on. But it's a tricky thing, and sometimes you may end up pending towards the doctors or who is commissioning the design work. But at the end, I think what's more reasonable is to really try to take advantage that you were in the process and you heard everyone, and to try to really convey the message that people don't want that requirement just because they want, but because it makes a difference, and so that you can try to find an alternative together.
Okay, one last question.
Okay, a short one. You had the functional requirement when you had communicate with patients, communicate with other patients.
Yeah.
You had crossed it out. Any particular reason or any insight that you got from the study? Why did you?
So it was a bit, well, as you could see, the thing was already getting quite complex, and we were going to do this trial in 5 different countries. So when the communicate with patients actually was about building some sort of forum. And that would mean that if we want to implement that, we'd have to build actually 5 different forums, because there would be 5 different languages, and build 5 different communities to make, because a forum would just meaningful.
Just to reduce complexity, not
mainly to reduce complexity. Although one thing else we noticed that there is a lot of, there are already some forums there, so some patients actually to be more a matter of getting to know there is a forum. And when it came to the forum, there was also, when we were actually in the interview phase, it was a bit mixed. Some people actually were interested in discussing with other patients, especially those that were relatively new to the disease or coming into a new stage, while others, they just don't want to talk about the disease, they already spend too much time with it.
Thank you